All right, Daf Kuf Yud Beis. This is Thursday's Daf, as we pick it up on Kuf Yud Aleph Amud Beis, 9 lines from the bottom, which is going to continue telling us halachic stories about Nat Bar Nat. Rav Huna v'Rav Chia Barashi have a yasve chad b'hai gisa de mabra de sura. One of them was sitting on one side of the Sura River. V'chad b'hai gisa de mabra. So Lamar, to one of them, aisule dogim she'olu b'ka'ara v'achal b'kutach. They brought some fish that had been put when it was hot on a fleshika plate, and he ate it with kutach, right, which we know is milchik. And Lamar, to the other one, aisule te'enim v'andavim b'sei chasuda. They brought these different figs and grapes during the Su'uda. V'yachal v'loy barich. And he ate them and didn't make another bracha. It doesn't mean chas v'shalom he ate it without brachas. It means they had already washed in the beginning of the Suda, and he didn't make a new borei priya eitz or an al ha'etz afterwards, but relied on the hamaitzi and the benching. So Mar Amar Lechavre, one of them said to the other one, Yasma, which is lashon of a yasam, meaning an orphan that doesn't have a rebbe. Ovid Rabba Chachi, did your rebbe do such a thing like this? Umar Amar Lechavre, Yasma, Ovid Rabba Chachi, did your rebbe do such a thing like this? In other words, each one was complaining about the other one. You're eating fish that was on a fleshika plate with your milchiks, and you're not making a bracha on the peiros that you got during your Suda. So Mar Amar Lechavre, the one who ate the fish with the kutach, says, Ano Kishmul severely. Kishmul, as we said yesterday, is matir, the dogim with the kutach. Umar Amar Lechavre, the one who ate the figs and the anavim without making a new bracha, says, Ano Rebbe Chia severely. The Tani Rebbe Chia passed paiteras kol mine meichel. When you make hamaitzi, you don't have to make any other brachas. V'yayin paiter kol mine mashkin. And similarly, when you have wine, like for instance when we make kiddush, that takes care of all of the other brachas on liquids. You don't have to make a shakal on the soda once you make a borei priya guffin on the wine. And this idea of the pas paiteras kol mine meichel is the whole shiloh lahalacha about desserts. The common practice is that for all mine mezainis, we don't make a new bracha if you get a piece of cake for dessert. But if you get peiros or candy or something like that for a dessert, then you're going to make a new bracha because it's not considered part of your seuda. All right, but getting back to Nat Bar Nat. Omer chizki mishum abaya. Hilchas adogim she'olu b'ka'ara muter lo'achlan b'kutach. Any fish that was put hot onto a fleshika plate can be eaten with the milchika kutach. But tznoin, a radish, davar charif, shechotchu b'sakin, which was cut with a knife, shechotach babasar, and then that knife was actually fleshik, aser lo'achlei b'kutach. You can't now turn around and eat that radish cut with a fleshika knife with your milchika dip. Now, even though the knife is cold, the radish is cold, so l'chayra, why would it be aser? But because the radish is a davar charif, and you're pushing hard down with the knife, that combined does give it a din like as if it was hot. V'hani mili tznoin, and that chumrah is only with a tznoin, a radish, moving over to Amud Aleph, to Agav Chorfei Bola. Because of the fact that it's charif, it absorbs the tam of the basar that's in the knife. Aval kishus. But let's say it was something like a squash that was cut with the fleshika knife. Gar lebei piske v'yachil. You just can scrape off the area of that vegetable, and then the rest of the vegetable you can eat with the kutach. Because since the kishus are not davar charif, they're not going to absorb any of the fleshiks. Kilchei delifta is shari. A turnip stalk, if you cut that with a fleshika knife, you can eat that with kutach. But the silka, if you cut the beets with a fleshika knife, then it'll be asiri, because like the tznoin, like the radishes, the beets are considered a davar charif. The ipasach behu delifta, and if you switch off the cutting between the beets and your turnips, shaper dummy, you're allowed to eat those beets with the kutach, with the milchika kutach. Because the sweet tam of the turnips negates the tam of the fleshiks in the knife, ad kedei kach, that even a beet, which is charif, that you cut afterwards, won't have the tam of the basar in it. And of course, the same thing would apply to the tznain and other kinds of davar charif that were done interchangeably with turnips. And this is actually the end of the sugya of Nat Bar Nat. Now, one important point to make that's in the Rishonim is whether or not this idea of Nat Bar Nat that our Gemara keeps talking about fish as the example, would that mean that the fish was just put on a fleshika plate, but not that the fish was cooked in a fleshika keli, and that the kula of Nat Bar Nat is only when it was put on this keli and not cooked in the keli. That's what Taisus brings b'shem the Rivan, but most Rishonim don't make such a chilik. And the other point I want to make over here is that the Paiskim are medayik from dogim she'olu b'ka'ara, that the fish happened to have been on this fleshika plate. It's only b'diavad, it's only if it was done, that we're mater Nat Bar Nat to be eaten with the kutach only acher hamaisa b'diavad. But you can't lechatchila put hot food that you're going to eat with milchiks on a fleshika plate and then bedafka create a Nat Bar Nat matziv that you want to be makel with. Okay, weiter. Boy mine Rav Dimi me Rav Nachman. Mahu la'anuche kada de milcha gabe kada de michba. What's halacha legabe putting a container of salt next to the container of kutach? Do we need to be concerned that some of the milchika kutach could go into the salt, and then now you're going to take salt and put it on the meat? So Amalei, Zok Rav Nachman, Aser, Yitaka can't put the salt by the kutach. Okay, but decholamai, what about putting the container of vinegar next to the kutach? What's going to be the halacha there? Amalei, Zok Rav Nachman, Shari, that's going to be okay. That'll be different than salt. Umayshna, what's the chilik between the salt that we said is Aser and the vinegar that we said is mutter? Zok Rav Nachman, L'chitechel Allah kaira de milcha. When you measure out some salt for me, I'll explain the difference. In other words, when you are meshamish me and you do a service for me, we find this in other Gemaras as well. We had it back on Daf Yud Beis similarly. that a Rebbe says, when you're Mishamish me, then you're going to be my Talmud and I can explain it to you. And now he says, my time, what's talking the Chilik? Hi Isa Isur Be'ene, by the case of the Melech, by the salt, if the Kutach would spill on the salt, you would be able to see the Dvar Aser, you'd be able to see the thick Kutach. But Hi Leisa Isur Be'ene. But by the vinegar, if the Kutach would spill on the vinegar, you would not be able to see the Kutach anymore because it would dissolve into the vinegar and become bottle. And therefore it's going to be more problematic with the salt because since you can see it, it's not going to be bottle and therefore it'll be a real problem. But by the vinegar, since it's going to be bottle, it'll be less of an issue. Hahu bar goizola de nafel akada de chamka. There was this geshachta little bird that fell into a jar of this milchik kutach. So Sharia Rav Chinana berei de Rava mipashreinya, and this Rav Chinana was mater it. And what does it mean he's mater? It means he rinsed off the kutach and he was still able to eat it. And as Rashi says, even though the kutach is very salty, you might think that that would be considered like it's hot and create a problem for the chicken to fall into it and you can't just rinse it off. But Omer Rava, man chokem lemishri ki haigavna. Who is going to be so much of a chacham to be mater azazach? Ilav Rav Chinana berei de Rava mipashrenya. Because Ksav Rav Chinana holds ki Omer Shmuel maliach hareu kereiseach. When Shmuel says that the things that are salted are like they're hot, that's only hanimili heichad einanechel machmas milchai. That's only when that food is salted so much that you can't eat it because of its saltiness. But avahai kutacha, this kutach hari nechel machmas milchai. Fakir, people eat it because they like the saltiness. That won't be a saltiness enough that would make it like as if it's hot. But v'hani milichai, that's only if the bird, the pigeon, or this geshachtana bird that fell in was raw. Avol tzoli, but let's say the bird was already cooked, boy klipa. Then it's going to be more absorbent, and then you have to peel off that whole layer of flesh where the kutach was touching it. V'i ispe pili kule oser. And if the roasted meat of the bird had cracks in it, now we're afraid the kutach got into it, and klipa won't be enough to take it off, then you have to do more. V'i mesabel betavel kule oser. And more than that, if this bird was already spiced, it had its 11 herbs and spices, then we're afraid it's going to be even more absorbent, and klipa won't be enough, even if it doesn't have any cracks in it. Amar of Nachman, Amar Shmuel. Kikar shechotach aleha basar. If you have a kikar, meaning a loaf of bread, that you use as a surface in which to cut a piece of cooked meat, asur lachla. You're not allowed to eat that bread. And we're talking about here that the meat has dam that comes out of it. And so now we're afraid that the actual mice of cutting the meat will actually release more dam going into the bread. But vahani mili to asmik. That's only when it was reddened. I mean, you could see that the meat, when it was alive, had been bruised. That's when we're afraid that the roasting itself won't take out all the dam, and therefore the liquid that's coming out of the meat when it's being cut on the bread actually has dam in it. And vahani mili to avre. And that's only if the actual liquid that came out of the meat actually went all the way through and through the bread. And vahani mili to asmache. That's only if that liquid that came out of the meat is thick and has the property of blood. Aval kalishta les lamba. But if the liquid is thin, then it's not blood and we don't have to worry about it. Shmuel shadi leila kalbe. Shmuel would take this kind of bread that the roasted meat was cut on it, and he would throw it to his kelev, to his dog. Because it's usher to eat, but there's no isur hanas, so you might as well give it to the dog. Rav Huna yav leila shame, but Rav Huna would give it to his shamish, but he wouldn't eat it himself. So manav shach frak the gemara. Yishari lekuli al mashari. If it's mutter, anybody's allowed to eat it, not just the shamish. If you tell me it's usher because of dam, then lekuli al usher even for the shamish. So how do you reconcile these two different ways to go? Shani Rav Huna de anina daite. Rav Huna was like an istinus. He could have eaten it, but he didn't want to eat it, so he gave it to his shamish. Rava ochale. Rava though would eat such bread. V'kari le chamar basar. He would call the liquid that came out of the meat the wine of the meat, which was his way of saying it's not really blood. Amar Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel ein menichin kli tachas basar. Don't put the kli, which is, as we mentioned the other day, the beidugi. It's the thing that catches all the fat that drips. Don't put that under the roasting meat. Ad sheyichla kol mara adam dumas shabaya, until all that red liquid comes out of the meat, and therefore you don't have to worry about any halach of dam. How do we know at what point in the process it's no longer going to be poiled any dam? So Marzutra Mishmei de Rapapa Omar Mishatale Tim Rosai, when a column of smoke rises out of it. At that point, the meat is no longer exuding dam. Or some want to learn it's when smoke begins to come out of the coals that are underneath the meat, because the blood drips on the coals and puts out the coals. Once the dam is finished going out, now there's real smoke that comes out of those coals. Rashi. Maybe only the bottom part of the meat, which is closer to the coals, that's got no more dam, but ilah leimata. But the upper part of the meat hasn't reached that point yet. Maybe there really still is dam there. Ella Amar Rav Ashi les le takanta. There really is no way to ever put a beidugi underneath their meat. Ella mishda bei tarti glale milcha. But the only thing you could do is to throw 2 clumps of salt, which will actually cause any dam that collects in the beidugi to be drawn to the salt at the bottom of the keli. So it's just some way to pull the blood away. Turning over Talmud Beis, umishpei. Then you could take the beidugi keli, you could kind of pour it off. So the stuff that's at the top is just fat. That'll be okay. And the blood that might have collected is going to be stored at the bottom with that salt that you threw in there. Amar le Rav Acha berei de Ravika le Rav Ashi. Umiyamar Shmuel Hachi. Shmuel said that once all this red liquid goes away from the meat, you're allowed to put the beidugi keli underneath to catch the fat. I've Omer Shmuel, Kikar shechatach aleha basar asur la'achla. If you have a loaf of bread on which you cut a piece of roasted meat, you're not allowed to eat it because we're afraid of that dam going into it. So you see that Shmuel holds that roasted meat does have some kind of leftover dam in it. So how would you say that according to Shmuel, you're allowed to put the beidugi keli underneath the meat without putting this salt eitzah once all of this liquid is drained from it? And for the Gemara Shani Hazam, the agav duchka de sakina pulit, because of the pressure of the knife that you're pushing into the meat. So now that's going to cause the remaining dam to come out, even though it hadn't come out prior al yedei that roasting. Amar Rav Nachman, dagim va'ifais shemalchan zeim ze asurin. If you have some chicken and fish that were salted with one another, they're going to be asur. Meaning that fish by itself is asur because it absorbs the dam that comes out of the chicken or whatever other bird. This is, by the way, not the halacha of the sakana of eating fish and chicken together, which we're noyeg to do. This is talking more about the halacha of the dam of the oif going into the dagim. So frankly, more heichidami. If you're talking about you salted it together in a keli that had no hole in it, I feel oifes nami asiri, because now you've got dam in the same keli with the other dvar heter. And keli menukah, if you're telling me that it's a keli that has holes in it, and that's where you're doing the salting, afilu dagim v'oifes nami shari. Because just like you're allowed to salt two different pieces of basar, one on top of the other, in a keli that has holes in it, which is taka the minig, because the dam that comes out of the upper piece drains through the holes in the keli and it is not absorbed by the lower piece of meat. So too, if you have dagim and oifes in the same keli, but there's holes in the keli, whatever dam comes out of the bird, I'm not worried about it. It's not going to go into the fish. And for the Gemara, li'aylam b'kli menukah, we are talking about this matzav of holes in the keli. So v'dagim, so why should this fish be aser? Because mishum de rafu karamayu, the skin of the fish is very soft and it's porous. So in that case, kodme upalte. Rashi says it pushes out the tzir shalahen. Whatever liquids are inside the fish get squeezed out right away. However, v'oifes kamite, the skin of birds is tighter, which will slow the exiting of the dam and its own liquids. So therefore, basar denaiche dagim plete oifes. After the fish finished exuding all of their tzir, all of its juices, that oif is still pushing out its dam. And then at that point, the fish will now absorb the dam of the bird. That's why you can't eat the fish when they're in the same keli, even though the keli has holes with this geshacht in a bird. And we're going to stop here, and we'll pick it up with Rav Mari Bar Rachel for tomorrow's daf.